You can see it as a little bit cruel putting me on when there's beer right there through the wall and you're all waiting for it. Thank you very much. I love that it says VIP on the badges of the speakers. It's wonderful. Of course, we do get VIP passes quite often at EMI Music, and sometimes they get you into dark rooms in nightclubs where you meet DJs and models, and I use that as a chance to talk about data. Sometimes they get you backstage in big stadiums at big concerts to meet aging rock stars, and I use that as a chance to talk about data. But, any one of my friends will tell you that this is definitely the coolest VIP pass I've had, thank you. And yes, I'm going to use it as a chance to talk about data. So I want to tell you a bit of a case study story about EMI and what EMI has achieved using big data. And EMI is about something quite magical. It's about the hopes and dreams of artists and their aspirations. It's about emotions and connecting with you guys. So you might think that you get to sit back and just relax now, think about the beer and enjoy a story, because it doesn't relate to you. But actually, I think everything I'm going to talk about does relate to you. So you're going to have to think about real work, I'm afraid. And to that end, I'm going to talk a bit about zeebox, where I also work at the end, which is a totally different business, totally different industry. And I'll just talk briefly about how all these principles totally apply as well. So this is the EMI story. There's 4 themes that I want to bring out as part of this. The first is what is the potential for big data, and absolutely, certainly, I think the potential is change. It's organizational change, it's cultural change. That's what we've achieved at EMI, and that's the potential of this as a tool. When you meet artists after gigs or at parties, and they say, hey, so what do you do at EMI? And you say, oh yeah, I'm the data guy. And when they say, oh, that's cool, thank you, you've really helped me, the data's been really helpful to my career, then you know you really have achieved change. Second theme I want to pull out is the role of big data in an organization. What role should it play? What role should it not play in the organization? Some really important themes there for how we did what we did. Next, the importance of culture. So the culture of the organization in which you're introducing big data, but also the importance of using big data to drive culture, to be part of the culture. It's a really important theme. And then finally, to talk about the type of people that are required for big data to succeed. I think people are far more important than any discussions on technology, and I think that's a theme that you'll see here. So 4 themes. Just talk about music for a moment. Let me set the scene here. Why data and music? Although there are 2 record labels here today, which I think a big data conference is a great achievement for the music industry. So the old world in the music industry looked something like this. Successes were big and profitable, and they paid for the less successful artists. Or something like that anyway. Either way, there wasn't a thorough focus on organization, on planning, on thinking things through. It was a lot more driven by passion and skills and judgment. But that, of course, was the old world. The new world looks something like this. It's full of ones and zeros, and there are challenges. There are many of them, and you don't have to follow the music industry to realize that. So in the new world of piracy and reduced sales, I won't go into cause and effect there, but we're much more reliant on brand partnerships, so brands working with our artists to introduce our artists to the brand's consumers. Brands don't speak the language of skill and judgment and belief, they speak the language of data. And by the way, also artists want to know when you propose a brand for them that this brand will work for them and for their consumers. They want to know that this is not something that will damage their career. So data is helping us to engage brands. There was a household name artist that I spent some time with a few weeks ago, and he said in the meeting, yeah, so there's this big brand, it's a major deal for me, it's a global deal, I'm going to endorse this product of theirs, I'll be in all the TV adverts globally. He says, and I kind of want to do it, I think it's quite cool, it's a lot of money, I just don't know, what are my fans going to think about this? So I said, leave it with me. 3 weeks later, somebody, not me, was on a plane to go talk to him about exactly what his consumers thought about this in 5 countries, analysed by different types of consumers. It totally helped to make that decision, which he did. Underinvesting in people is another challenge in the music industry. This is industry-wide, I think. It's not an industry that was full of training and support and procedures and data. And so the challenge going in with data here was that people weren't used to that culturally. Artists and managers are absolutely key in music. We can't do anything without the artist and the artist manager supporting us. So helping them to understand what we understand about the realities of the market, the challenges, the opportunities that we face, building relationships with them and helping them to understand was absolutely key. Yeah, and there's many examples of the artist or the manager really valuing this. Another household name, rock band, the artist said, I've been to many presentations from, I won't do an accent, many presentations from many record labels over the years, and he said, and this is by far the best. You know? So when you use data appropriately and really help you to make decisions, then it's appreciated and builds relationships. We've got a challenge with launching artists. I said there were many challenges, by the way. So when we've got a new artist, which type of consumer should we go connect them with? What type of marketing, what types of products should we be working on? Sometimes we perhaps shouldn't be launching artists. The data says actually it's better to wait for the right time, and now is not the time to try to get this artist out into the world. We've got a challenge with commercial relations. We're not the biggest record label, but our aim is to, and we think we've done a great job of being the smartest record label, which helps to get commercial advantage in dealing with suppliers and in dealing with iTunes and Spotify and all of the other powerful organizations out there. And we're a very newsworthy industry. People like photos of celebrities in news stories. Doesn't mean the stories are often correct, but having data and having insight helped us to shape the agenda sometimes against the pressure of the media. So lots of challenges, which is great. And this is the context into which we introduce data. So what is the opportunity for big data at EMI? What was the opportunity? Well, there are many. And we won't go through all of these. I think they're self-explanatory. But I think the point here is that there are many ways in which data can help. There's many ways in which it was an opportunity. So whether it's helping people all around the world to speak the same language and use the same data to support their decisions, that's pretty helpful in and of itself. So when major artists gets off the plane in Milan or in Tokyo or in LA, the local team speak the same language, use the same presentation, and tell him that in the same language what they want to do to help promote him in that country. It's a language thing. Sometimes we had decisions we weren't sure about, and the data helped to tip us over. Sometimes we just knew what we wanted to do, but the data just helped us to persuade other people that that was the right thing to do, or helped us to understand each other because we didn't have previously the same language. So many different roles that data played in the business. How did we introduce data? What was the answer? Well, you might guess from the name of the conference that it was all about big data, which drove insight, which helped us to get decisions made. But in reality, that's not how it works. And in reality, I think that's never how it works. If we're honest, there's always skills and judgment right there at the heart of the decision, even if it looks on the surface like it was a data-driven decision. It's not. I've worked in mergers and acquisitions, and I worked on the presidential election in the US, and I worked to forecast the number of cabbages that are going to be bought in Tesco 3 weeks on Saturday. And in every one of those situations, if we're honest, skills and judgment are right up there with data. So we recognize that. This is not the model that we used. Our answer was much more like this. Yes, we obviously need big insight from big data. Obviously, we wouldn't be here today otherwise. And whether that's music research, playing thousands of songs to hundreds of thousands of people across 25 countries, and understanding the hundreds and hundreds of data points each of those listens gets you. Whether it's just straight up consumer research, of which we've done probably 800,000 interviews now across 30 countries. Whether it's industry data, the wealth of data that lives out there on music and on entertainment industry, or whether it's the detailed sales reporting, the billions of records of transaction level data that we get from partners like iTunes or Spotify. So big data and the insight from that obviously are an important part of it. But recognizing that sits alongside skills and judgment. as I said, and this is my favorite slide. I use this at the front of every presentation with every artist, and because really insight and skills and expertise working together, what that means is that we recognize skills and expertise from EMI's people helps to set the questions and the issues and the hypotheses and the data which you analyze. And if you do it properly, the data informs and supports and nurtures and encourages and builds the capability of the people. It doesn't sit in isolation, it's part of the ecosystem. And together, they're used to make these decisions that we talked about, or to reason why I feel like we need to connect with this type of consumer, and here's how they behave, here's the products they want, here's the marketing they want. Combining skills and judgment with data, that's okay. Sometimes decision making, sometimes just reasoned arguments, but working together. And in the middle, we have this really important part of our model. It's not just the global insight team, which I run, and not just the people on the ground running the labels day to day, but these leads, country leads or business unit leads who sit in the middle. They're embedded in the teams right here. They're part of the day-to-day decision-making, planning, issues, not in the global team, but at the same time they're a bridge, and they're helping to facilitate this learning on both sides. So there's a really important people element there coming across already. So that's the role of data. There are some really important principles that we use from the start, and that every day we wrestle with in deciding, should we do this? Should we take it in this direction? Should we listen to this request that somebody's got for a piece of analysis or a piece of insight? These principles, the danger is when you put them on a slide and talk about them, they all sound very obvious, and you can just nod along if you want. But every day, these principles are things that we wrestle with, and that we make decisions using them. So here's some of them. Whenever we do insight or using data, we make sure that it's relevant. Sounds obvious, but 90% of the data I see and the reports I see are not really relevant to that person in the context in which they encounter that report, in the role that they're doing day to day, with the issues that they're facing. So it's finally honed to what is that person interested in knowing at the point at which he encounters the data. Relevancy, really, really thorough. And we throw out so many requests and so many pieces of analysis that we could do, because it breaks that one. Cheap and quick, cheap at a unit basis, so even if we do a big expensive project, cover many, many artists in that project, or cover many, many countries, or cover many, many issues, so that the cost is spread out amongst a very large number of potential beneficiaries, and hence the unit cost is very low. So cheap data. Quick, always, not big, long projects. Quick projects, small projects, rapid projects. For all colleagues, so we do not support, we do not run insight projects. We don't do pieces of analysis that benefit just one person in just one team. We won't do a project just for the marketing team here, or just for Japan over here. We'll hear Japan, and we'll be interested in the project, and then we'll scale it across the whole world so that everybody benefits from the really smart question that Japan have asked about this artist. So always thinking globally, and this is a bit slower sometimes, and sometimes we say, no, I'm sorry, we can't help. But the benefit is we have truly global insight and a truly global culture. It must be powerful, it must tell us something different. If you look at the graph or the report and it doesn't tell you what to do, if you don't get energized by that, then why did we do it? Broad, global, repeatable, we've talked about some of these. And then ultimately, feeding and building a shared language. Language is literally what it is. We have names for different types of consumers. We have names for different stages in the artist's development process. We have names for different types of products or types of marketing that we should be doing. It's literally building language. And guiding, not hitting with a stick or informing, but guiding our decision making. So again, they could sound really waffly, but every day we wrestle with these, and we trade these off. It's very difficult, but it's how we achieve what we've achieved. I want to argue one point, which might be controversial. I think, and this has brought success to us, I think one key skill in big data is reduction. It's taking either a business question that you're being asked and really focusing and saying, what is the question I'm essentially trying to argue? Not trying to build a system or a process or a set of data that's all things to all people. that's when you need serious kit and serious time and serious money and serious risk. But really, by focusing on what is the business question we're trying to answer, you don't need to build this, and you can be much more nimble. That also applies to reduction of the data that you use in the problems that you're facing. And the cool thing to do is to say, oh yeah, we have billions of records of data, and it's growing all the time, and oh man, I don't know how to handle it. We do have that. But the reality is that any one business question, or any one report, or any one issue that, as the audience that users in EMI care about, only actually requires you to use a pretty small subset of that data. Either a 1% sample and you filtered it, or a filter on a set of criteria, actually only analyzing a reasonable subset at any one time. And the reality is what you want on your desk as a user isn't this. You want this. You want about 100 data points, not a few thousand or a few million, and certainly not a few billion. And so, yes, it's big data on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's very focused and reduced in what needs to be where at any point. Of course, you have to be quite ruthless to get away with this, and so it does take some strength, but it's possible. So a couple of examples here, I think. One is, Spotify, we get transaction level data every time you listen to a track. So that is in the billions. We did a really sophisticated project with proper scientists, not me, and we took a sample of data which I could email to them. It was that small. And what came back was insight which totally revolutionized our understanding of the role of the streaming service in cannibalizing, or not cannibalizing as the case may be, digital download sales, which we've used to great effect with artists and managers, helping them to understand this, and we've used with Spotify, helping them to understand based on our science. So incredible insight that's been incredibly powerful for us, based on something that we emailed from a larger data set, admittedly. So, I talked about people, and I definitely want to pick this theme up. Because for me, this is the reason I think lots of big data projects fail. I used to work as a consultant as well, so I've seen a few different companies, as well as politics and working at Tesco, and charity, so that's every industry covered, apart from academia. And I think this is why it mostly fails. So here's my sketch of the value chain that I see from start to finish in generating insight. I saw at least 2 other versions of this slide today, and I think it's helpful to have different versions of it. It'd be good to compare them, do a little study. I see at the very minimum, to get big data working, you need to identify useful business questions, where data can actually help with the answer, not just interesting, but actually useful questions. Actually, it's pretty tough. You need to identify appropriate data from this big database that we have. You need to identify appropriate technology to house the data, gather, store, make accessible the data, clean and join the data, identify analysis technology, analyze and access the data, identify dashboarding and reporting technology, present the results back in a simple but powerful reports, interpret the results, make sense of them in a way that's rigorous, that respects the data, what it is and what it is not, but also actually useful to drive conclusions. And then you need to present the results back to the business, sometimes a business that doesn't really want to accept the results or isn't that excited about it. Translate it into recommendations and in a way that's bold and inspiring so that they actually pay attention, but also in a way that respects the data. You've got to overcome the questions and the issues that people will have with it. Because if you can't answer the detailed questions, then you're not going to get respect. So at a minimum, this is the chain as I see it. And peppered throughout this are people. They're all people things, not technology things. And that's the theme. Any one of these, this is the really sad thing, I think. If any one of these is not done properly, if you don't have the right people to do any one of these, then the whole thing's going to fail, right? So if you haven't asked the right questions initially, then it's all well and good having all this, but whatever. And if you've got all this, but you don't actually present the results back in a way that helps people get recommendations, and if you don't actually do it in a way that builds trust with the user and have that relationship, then that's all well and good. And I can tell you that I've seen, we're rolling this out globally at EMI. We're working in 25, 30 countries, and I can tell you that in some countries, we were lacking some elements of this workflow, and it was not as much of a success as the countries where we had all this. I've seen this mistake get made. And in EMI, I think when we started there were some wonderful people doing some parts of this, particularly in the IT teams. It's always the IT teams. They seize this early, and they gather the data, and they build great systems. They didn't have the first bit, they didn't have the last bit, and they were just sat there. So, people. Next, in terms of what was helpful as a way of working for us, is the concept of proving and then building, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. I want to illustrate that with an example. For individual artists, pulling data out at an artist level to have a conversation with an artist about their consumers, the products, and their marketing, we started off with the glamorous tool known as Excel, and on my computer, and we built reports for 1 to 10 artists, that kind of range, just to see what the report should look like, to play with it a little bit, before we bothered to commission an IT solution. And what benefits did that deliver? Well, a household name rock artist was renewing their contract with EMI, and as a core part of the discussions with the artist, as an absolutely core part of the strategy and vision we set out for them renewing their contract with us. And as a core part of that contract and the consumers we were going to reach, the products we were going to launch, and the marketing we were going to do, was the exact conclusions from my little Excel sheet. So that was pretty good. Then we broke that pretty quickly and had someone help me with the macros in order to automate the spreadsheet. That was pretty good. And it scaled us to 10 to 100 artists we're helping now. Still boiling down millions of rows of data, but doing so only for 10 to 100 artists. The benefits that got us are that most of the artists we were working at that point in time had data for them, so most of them were engaged in the process and had presentations by the local teams, and we scaled pretty well. We broke that and put the spreadsheet into what's called Excel services, which basically puts a web version of your spreadsheet up for people to play with, scales in a much better way, did 100 to 1,000 kind of artists, by which point we had artist managers flying around the world, and they were able to have the same conversation in multiple countries already, so that was where the point we got to in terms of rolling it out. And then where we are right now, reporting services, the next step up, requires much more development time, and therefore is slower and more delicate. But you know what? It scales pretty well. So we've got many thousands of artists in the system now. And at some point we'll break this, I'm sure. The Microsoft chap promised we never would break this. But at some point we'll break this and we'll see what's next. But this is the concept. Prove first and then build, then build, then build. So finally on the EMI story, there's some other lessons that we found very important. The first, which I mentioned before, but just to emphasize that if you're interested in driving change, then without having these business leads, these people who are embedded in the teams that we're trying to help to change, without these experts on the ground day to day as part of the meetings, building trust and respect, understanding the business on the ground, then we're so disconnected as to not be able to really affect the business. So people on the ground are absolutely vital, and my global team could never affect change without local expertise. So really, really important, and by the way, missing in many businesses. Next, leadership. If we're serious about the business using data and using insight as part of what they do, then the leadership team should be doing so as well. And so to see them stand up and talk about artists without using insight as part of that conversation, it's not setting the right example. We saw some of that, and to see leadership stand up and use insight as part of what they're talking about artists, it's a natural part of when they do so. Obviously it's the right thing to do and sets the right example. Really important. But also HR. People have objectives and rewarded for certain behaviors and not for others. That's all encapsulated in a wonderful HR and performance system. And if we're serious about driving change, then so this should be part of the performance and review system, which it now is. But this is the whole package here, of course, not just a smart team pushing out reports. And finally, we were very lucky because my team had real independence right from the start. We were able to run this the way we wanted to run it. We were able to come up with these principles We were not at the mercy of the marketing team or the product development team or the French team. We were able to look across the business and make bigger decisions than any one department or any one person, which we were very lucky to have that gift, and many insight teams don't have. But that was a big part of why we were so successful. That's my EMI story. Just to touch for a moment, as I said I would, on zeebox, which is the other place that I work. I'll explain that later. But zeebox is an app in the TV industry, and it's radically different from anything I've talked about in terms of the business. But the same data principles, the same big data principles, totally apply. And I want to illustrate that briefly to give you a sense that I think they apply in other businesses as well. So just to introduce zeebox, we analyze the audio and video signal of live TV. We pull together information from commercial and social areas on that context, and we group it all together. And in our app, iPhone or iPad or web, we augment every TV show with second-by-second information and commercial opportunities and social events. So we're enhancing and augmenting live TV. Sounds nothing like music, right? And what this means is that we're gathering this detailed, rich data on people, how they engage with zeebox, their Facebook and Twitter information. We're surveying people to find out additional information and modeling that back to the wider population. We understand all the information within a TV show about what happens second by second in that show and which parts of the show people engage with. It's a wonderful, rich pool of information. From that, we're drawing simple but powerful insight. We're drawing graphs and charts that are focused on the user and what are that user trying to achieve from that data. What questions are you asking in the moment that you're using the data? Really focused graphs. So taking massive data set, refining it down and making it useful to people in the moment. And then we're delivering it to them in dashboards and reports and things. And it is a totally different business with totally different data. But every single one of the principles that I've just talked about, every single one of these lessons that we've learned at EMI absolutely apply back to this business and will, I think, enable us to be a great success in the data front. And that was the end of my case study. Thank you very much.